Well, thanks for having me, and thank you to Sheila and to USEA for hosting this important annual forum. Look forward to getting back in person at some point in the future, but like this as well, and it gives me a chance to hear from my colleagues. Jim Matheson in particular is always great to hear from. So I just want to jump right in. From my perspective, the challenges facing the electric sector in 2022 are similar to the challenges of 2021, but with a few important exceptions. And my list isn't comprehensive by any means, but I believe some of the challenges and opportunities get to the core issues, and many of which touch on the energy transition, and that you'll hear about in various ways, I'm sure, throughout today or already have. And I want to also kind of emphasize something Jim said, which is we really forget how challenging it was 100 plus and even 80 years ago when the co-ops came into the mix, building out the electric system that we have, which I believe Time magazine called one of the top kind of wonders of the 20th century, was an extremely difficult task. We had a lot of people who were up to that task, and we're up to the task of this transition. The key areas are just going to be that maintenance of reliability and affordability while we do it. And I think if it could have been done already, we would have done it already. So we need to be mindful that challenges do exist, but that we can be up for it, especially if we have the right people and the right policies in place. But in terms of just kind of carryover challenges from last year to this year, I've identified a few. So the changing customer expectations, we just have a lot more granularity about what our customers, my members' customers, want from them, especially on the residential side. I think you've got folks who just kind of want to keep getting their bill and they want it to be affordable. And then that runs the gamut to someone who wants to put on all the things on their home, have solar panels, electric vehicle charging, and also wants to know, at every second of every day what their energy usage looks like and kind of help to manage that. So you've got that and everything in between. We've already had some level of granularity with our industrial and commercial customers over the years, but that's also evolving and becoming more granular. So changing customer expectations continues to be a challenge. Addressing climate change concerns and related regulatory complexity that comes with it. And obviously we haven't seen national policy in this regard yet, and we're still debating it, but communities and states are acting at various levels on climate change policies, as well as just communities deciding that they want to address it. And we've seen great strides made in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our sector. But there is some regulatory complexity and uncertainty that comes with that, particularly as we see the need to site new types of generation. We're seeing pushback, and permitting and siting even of clean energy and non-emitting resources can be very challenging. So that continues to be a challenge. Managing weather and other hazards, including a global pandemic. We're still in that environment, although we've learned a ton in terms of managing COVID-19 over the last 2 years. But these weather events, and no surprise, we've seen extreme weather events from wildfires to major hurricanes and the winter storm from last year that you already heard Jim talk about. So we got to figure out how we manage that. I mean, even to the point where in hearing from our members who were impacted by Winter Storm Uri, some of them in Texas, they had natural gas units or other units that just were not built to withstand temperatures below a certain threshold. That's not their specs were not built for that. So will we see that other extreme, maybe in colder weather climates? Are they going to get temperatures that are higher like we saw in the Northwest? We got to think about that, I think, going forward. Understanding the digitization versus cybersecurity issue. And this is an issue near and dear to my heart. We don't often understand the networks that are underpinning the reason why we have a cybersecurity concern in the first place. And utilities, and I know oil and gas as well, many of them deploy their own private communications networks that they run so that they can maintain optimal reliability on those networks. So as you put that digital overlay on, it brings some additional vectors of cybersecurity. And certainly as we're talking about the distribution grid and interacting with our customers there, yeah, that cybersecurity issue, again, no surprise, is an issue. It's kind of a classic yin and yang. I'm sure you'll hear more from Cheryl Riggs of UTC later today on that topic as well. But it is a challenge. It's a challenge that's that we can meet, but it's a challenge and we have to be mindful of it. Balancing changing political winds. I think in our industry, we always have to be mindful as well of sort of sitting in that middle place and working with both sides of the aisle, because things can change. And how do we manage that over time? Workforce availability, you've already heard about. I think there are, again, some opportunities I'll talk about as well, but that continues to be a challenge in our industry. And it's certainly now a challenge with this tight labor market throughout the economy. So how do we take a challenge that's already existed for a number of years and maybe make it even more of a challenge because of the tight labor market? How do we continue to shine a light on how great it is to work in our industry? And there's a need for ongoing, the last kind of ongoing and carryover challenge that I've identified here is the need for ongoing education, given the lack of understanding around what we do. Electric generation, transmission, and distribution. I mean, we hear all these people pontificating about it all the time, but they really have no basic sense of how it works. And they're not necessarily getting that robustly in school. So how do we make sure that we're educating, simplifying, not getting too technical? It's an ongoing challenge for us, not just for policymakers, but for the general population. So then some of the carryover opportunities are, related to these challenges. So telling the story of electricity, there are more platforms to do that now than ever. You don't have to pay for necessarily a Super Bowl ad to get your message across. You can use social media mindfully, and you have other opportunities and ways to continue to tell that story. So just kind of positioning ourselves to do that, I think, is really important, and maybe collaborating more heavily across the sector, not just in electricity, but on the oil and gas side, about places we may want to collaborate to tell these stories. Honestly, I don't know if many of you all know that there are 14,000 families in the Navajo Nation our member is a Navajo Tribal Utility Authority. 14,000 families in that part of the country have no electricity and they want it. So we developed a program in conjunction with our member NTUA to light up Navajo, and we're working with the entire electric sector to make this happen. It's a very expensive proposition, very difficult proposition. But when you see those families get electricity for the first time in our country, that tells an enormous story. It's such a reminder. It's such a stark reminder of how electricity underpins everything we do in modern life and can make a huge difference in the lives of families who don't have it. So we can also leverage federal dollars and partnerships. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about IIJA, that you heard from Jim about, which is a tremendous boon, I think, in terms of that federal investment side. So leveraging that more and leveraging partnerships with the federal government, maybe more than we have in the past as an industry. Certainly in the public power sector, we haven't used those dollars as much until recent years. And I think we will be taking advantage of those programs more than we have before. Continuing to leverage our collective knowledge and resources is super important in forums like this. Developing and maintaining partnerships, not just with the federal government, but with each other, and sometimes with non-traditional partners, like those in other industries that are particularly other critical infrastructure sectors. Remembering who we are and why we're in the business of provisioning electricity, which, as I mentioned already, is an essential service that underpins everything in modern life, everything. Creating future leaders is another opportunity, and how we do that, how we really bring people along who may not have traditionally, maybe the non-engineer types are going to be important. And I think that leads into the last kind of carryover opportunity, which is thinking differently about our workforce. In the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, I think it's sometimes what we need to think about too is even just diversity within our workforce from a skill set standpoint. So we of course still need to work on the broader DEI issues, but in addition, as we evolve we're in this energy transition, as we need to meet these evolving needs of our customers, we still need the engineers. They're really important, and the line workers for sure. I'd love to see more female line workers as an aside, and pushing for that. But we need to definitely embrace people who are great communicators, who can distill information, who can use social media. So that brings in, I think, a diversity of skill sets into our industry that can be very appealing and can really help us meet this transition. So in terms of new challenges for 2022, I think, not that this wasn't already there, but just pulling this out, which is that interdependencies piece, which was really highlighted during Winter Storm Uri. And APPA, patting myself on the back a little bit, but we weren't really able to do much about it. But in 2010, we published a report entitled Implications of Greater Reliance on Natural Gas in the Electric Sector. And it was presented to USEA in that year. So there were challenges we identified back then in that report that we're seeing come to fruition, but it's hard. I mean, these challenges become very difficult to even work on when there's not a visible sort of reference to what the implications could result in. And we saw that, unfortunately, that reference play out in Uri just about a year ago. So I hope that we can utilize that challenge and make it into an opportunity to address these issues intersector and intrasector, to see how we can kind of go back and focus on reliability as well as maintaining affordability. And then other interdependencies exist, and we know they exist. And this is, so this is not completely new for 2022, but I think it just is being highlighted more and more. Again, as we saw the outcome of Uri, particularly in Texas, but in other regions as well, it affected our members well up, north of Texas. But cybersecurity is, of course, an ongoing challenge. That yin and yang. We put more digital components on the grid. Cybersecurity continues to be a challenge and will be more of a challenge as we go forward. But it's really, continue to piece through how we meet that challenge more collectively. And it's, we in public power, I'm going to step into that a little bit. We're focused on that value of collaboration with the federal government and with others in the electric sector. And we're going to continue to make it front and center in 2022 and beyond. Some major challenges that for APPA members that could be raised are, just gaining executive level commitment and funding for cybersecurity build out. And, because it's increasingly costly. So just making sure we can make those arguments to our local regulators. As you all know, we're regulated by mayors and city councils, and they are very involved in our decision making and our budgets. So how do we continue to make that case? We're also, wanting to facilitate technology decision making in this kind of diverse, nascent, and rapidly evolving marketplace. It's very challenging, and it's, you got to make decisions, and then you might have to make a different decision in 3 or 5 years, which is not what we're used to in our industry. So those are kind of some other things we need to look at. And then having resources available, having the personnel and the kind of the workforce available, whether a consultant or otherwise, or an in-house person, it's a challenge. It's another workforce challenge. And I think we're thinking about it in terms of the collective challenge that we have, and how do we create processes where we can share. We are doing that already in our sector with this kind of idea of cyber mutual aid. So from kind of the big picture and big big threat landscape, we are thinking about that. But on the day-to-day efforts on cybersecurity, we probably also need to think differently as an industry, and certainly as public power, we're thinking about how we provide collective services to our smaller members. We also know that cyber incident reporting legislation is likely to be reconsidered in 2022, which is going to impact the electric sector holistically. And then, another kind of challenge here is to build back better or not to build back better. You know, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? I know there's discussions about peeling some of that off. We at APPA, in terms of the climate change piece, support a legislative solution to addressing climate, but with that three-legged stool of sustainability, affordability, and reliability at the forefront at all times. But given the uncertainty of what's going on in Congress on climate, we're of course anticipating EPA regulation. We know that there's some court decisions that are also could impact what EPA does in this space, but we'll all be looking at that space very closely, I'm sure. And then, you know, another kind of maybe new challenge, which is not so new, but maybe a focus in 2022 is supply chain. Yes, I said it, it's become a buzzword. We were always thinking about supply chain previously, I think more in that digitization and cyberspace, you know, cybersecurity space, meaning are our supply chains secure? Now we're thinking about supply chain more fundamentally. Do we have distribution transformers available? Pretty big deal, and appreciate the Department of Energy bringing that forward with a, you know, request for information around what are some of the challenges we're seeing, and we'll certainly work collectively on that. And then finally, kind of new opportunities in 2022, and on a bright note, focusing on reliability. We heard it from Jim. You know, maybe what happened last year can inspire more pragmatic intra-sector and cross-sector dialogue about these interdependencies. We've had these discussions before, but maybe we can focus them in 2022. Implementation of the IIJA, the infrastructure bill, bipartisan infrastructure bill, helps with many elements of grid modernization. I mean, you heard from Jim. I mean, it's a ton of money flowing to our industry in various elements of it. And we're excited to take advantage of it and help our members take advantage of getting those funding opportunities down on the ground and implementing them. We're supportive of robust bus funding across the board in, you know, electric and hydrogen vehicle infrastructure, research, development, deployment on carbon capture, storage, utilization and storage, hydrogen energy storage, advanced nuclear. We're leaders on small modular reactors in the public power side of the sector. Our members are heavily involved in the NuScale project, leading on that and leading in other advanced nuclear ways. We also believe strongly that we have to maintain and enhance hydropower as a generating source, despite some of those kind of permitting challenges and relicensing challenges. We have to have it. It's also for Black Start. It's for clean energy reasons. We really appreciate what the bipartisan infrastructure bill does to bolster hydropower. We also appreciate the infrastructure bill's funding of some of these cybersecurity programs, like I said, that really help us all as a sector and cross-sectorally to build out that cybersecurity posture and bring greater resources. And specifically, there are some things that it did for public power and APPA. And then another kind of, I think for us, opportunity is in the energy tax and comparable incentive side. You've heard from Jim, his perspective on that, and I couldn't agree more. We look forward to, if the Build Back Better, if we don't build back better, no, that's not how we should put it. If we build back better in a different way than the actual act, how are we going to utilize tax incentives? And if we expand them in a very comprehensive and workable way, we've tried this before, but we can get this direct pay refundable credit for our part of the sector and Jim's members as well. It will be a great boon for the industry writ large. We'll see a lot of kind of unleashing of our third of the sector. And there obviously is a renewed focus on that bulk power transmission grid, and we think that that's appropriate, but also we need to keep costs in mind. And as Jim mentioned, we're very focused, and most of our members are on the distribution side of the equation. So we're going to continue to focus our efforts in both places, but recognize that there are a lot of opportunities, as he said, to capitalize on that distribution focus in this energy transition. And I want to just end by saying that the history of public power includes bringing electricity to people and parts of the country that wouldn't have had access to it otherwise. And we've seen that also play out in the broadband space, which our members are helping to meet that challenge as well in many cases. So in other words, to consider service to all a priority And the challenge now includes ensuring that new and innovative technologies also get to every community, not just some communities. And balancing that with keeping costs reasonable so we don't overburden those who can least afford it. As I said, we're going to continue to work with our member, the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, to help light up the Navajo Nation and bring light where it doesn't exist now to those families who want it. And we welcome support for that effort. Light Up Navajo 3 kicks off this spring, so let me know if you're interested in supporting that effort. And thank you again.
Joy, that's a tremendous agenda that you've laid out for the American Public Power Association. I want to congratulate you on it, and also on your second anniversary as
thank you.
President and CEO. You've got quite a lot of things on the table. I appreciate your work in the Navajo Nation. USEA is also working there, and I've had the opportunity to travel to the Crow Nation, and I've seen similar there. I wonder if you could just spend, we have just a couple minutes, just spend 2 minutes telling us about what you're doing with the Navajo and the transformative nature of bringing electricity to people who don't have it. We see this in our work in the developing world, but most Americans don't realize that there are many Americans that still don't have access to electricity, and the transformative power that electricity has on a community.
Absolutely. And well, I think, your reference to some of the developing countries is sort of the case here, because it is such a vast area. I mean, the Navajo Nation itself comprises it's the size of the entire state of West Virginia. So, and then, we talk about in rural communities how you have, people per line mile. I mean, it's a very small amount of people that we're talking about who need electricity. So the cost is very high. The workforce that's needed is very specific and technical. So you need to be able to bring line workers in from other places and let them work for a few weeks. So we are doing that, gearing back up. We did it once in 2019 during the pandemic. They also got some funding for the federal government to continue to do it just within their footprint with the Navajo Nation workers. Well, we'll be bringing people back in from the outside again, which is really exciting. And we're doing it not just with public power, but with our investor and utility and electric co-op brethren, to really just spend the time, the effort, and the people power to get these folks electrified.
Congratulations. It's a great effort. I think it typifies the ethos of our industry, and I really, really appreciate the effort that you are making. So thank you for joining us this year, and look forward to talking with you again next year, if not sooner.
Thanks, Will.